I just want to eat him up. An archive of our own story by Holy Guacamole. Podcast also by Holy Guacamole. The fandom is Welcome to Night Vale. Summary is Kevin doesn't want Esteban to leave. Now, before we begin, this story bears heavy implications of cannibalism and cannibalism play, so if that gives you the heebie-jeebies, turn off your headphones right now or just hit stop. And I might caution not to read, though it isn't very explicit. Okay, on to the tags. Esteban, Freeform, Strex Corp, Cannibalism, Cannibalism Play, he eats people. Now, we're beginning. Enjoy! Esteban! He was quite the lovely man. Listeners, do you remember that delicious scientist that's been residing in our wonderful town of Desert Bluffs? Well, of course you do. Who could ever forget such a handsome and sturdy man, with his pristine white lab coat, spotless, shiny black cowboy boots, and that glossy trimmed hair? I probably never would have looked twice at that man if Eric hadn't given him that haircut. And on the house, too, what a friendly barber our small town Desert Bluffs has. I'm afraid if I may have bothered some of you with my overabundance of feelings for our savory scientist. Most especially our most loyal listeners, Strex Corp. 2 days ago, they had made clear at the regularly scheduled town meeting, your blueberry scones were absolutely heavenly, Mrs. Peters, that the visiting scientist had made no physical and visible difference, nor scientific benefit to the community, and they politely, but rather abruptly, requested each team member to pack up their possessions and immediately report to Strex Corp headquarters in 3 days' time. Now, I couldn't help but wonder if my many compliments had bruised some egos down at the Strex Corp research facility. Upon hearing his rather disappointing news, I gathered up my courage, walked right over to Esteban's glorious profile, and said, "I'm terribly sorry to hear you'll be leaving us so soon, Esteban. If it's no trouble to you, would you mind coming over to my house on your last morning here? Breakfast is, after all, the most important meal of the day, and you should leave here with a full and content being." And guess what, listeners? He said yes! Beautiful Esteban smiled his perfect smile, gently placed his large left hand on my shoulder, and gave a small squeeze. Listeners, I was in such a state that I almost missed his agreeing to my offer in the first place. Then he left with a tiny head nod. My shoulder was still tingling from the warmth of his large and attractively calloused hands. Calloused hands are a sign of a hard worker, one who's determined in all he does. So, just for a second, no, a fraction of a second, I was just a wee bit tiffed with Strex Corp for saying Esteban and his fellow scientists hadn't made a difference, because those perfect hands suggested otherwise. But then, I remembered that the good Strex Corp never judges the one, but the whole, just as they judge us all in our small town of Desert Bluffs. The other scientists probably don't work as diligently as Esteban. They probably don't even have calluses. Anyway, on to the fun part. At exactly 7:25 a.m., Esteban arrived with the most darling gift basket of assorted jams and cookies. That sweet man was giving me his mother's homemade care package in return of, and I quote, being the most hospitable and caring person he's ever met. Oh my goodness. Listeners, hand to the Almighty Lord. I nearly fainted on the spot. I am quite sure there will never be a man like Esteban in a good long while. Before I almost tripped over myself, the kindly scientist inquired about my feelings and smiled his perfect smile. So I promptly accepted his gift with gusto and led him to my dining room. My handsome guest seemed weary at first, what with being greeted to the sight of my hard work laid out on the table. The shy dear must have been nervous about being able to finish before having to report to Strexcorp on time, but I eased his nerves right on up, turned his frown upside down with grand information. The busy men at Strexcorp obviously overheard our conversation at the town meeting and sent over one of their workers at 7 a.m. to explain how Esteban was to be escorted from my premises upon arrival. Well, that certainly wouldn't do. So I very clearly stated how that was not going to happen. I told him of my divine breakfast plans for the good scientist, about how I was going to enjoy the time I had left with him, and then smiled. My special smile. Ever since I was a child, my special smile had worked on my parents, teachers, bullies, and even, it seemed, this Strexcorp employee. If he appeared dubious about my plans before, my smile convinced him otherwise, that my date would be carried out to its end. So he left, with an almost hurried walk to his gray Toyota, and gave me a winning grin as he drove away. After I explained Strexcorp's lovely gesture, I then went on to explain how I wanted our little breakfast date to end. Esteban could barely hold himself together through half of my ideas. He was shaking so bad. Finally, as I finished talking, my brilliant scientist broke down in tears of gratitude. Such a display of emotion. I near grew weak at the knees once more, but I gathered myself together, helped Esteban into his chair, and set down his gift basket at the centerpiece. I'm sorry to say, listeners, but Esteban was in such a state, I needed to help secure him to his chair, just in case he fell out of it again. But fret not, for he soon calmed down after he drank some of my grandmother's special recipe fruit juice. All of the jitters just seemed to go right out of him. Oh, grandmother, your juice always does the trick. Now, a few of you may be wondering, what spread had I prepared for Esteban this fine morning? Well, much like his pretty gift basket, I had cooked up an assortment of things. Eggs, sunny side up with a special sauce, tastefully laid atop so as to not break the delicate yolk. Freshly cooked and still warm bacon slices, all arranged artfully around some pig's feet with parsley stuck between. Ripe grapefruit with the peels skinned in the shape of a rose. Tender pieces of chicken fresh off the grill with a secret herb seasoning. As you can imagine, I put a lot of hard work into this meal. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day, as we are regularly reminded during Strexcorp's daily broadcast at 6 a.m. Remember, it's mandatory. As the wheel went on, I discovered Esteban wasn't much of a conversationalist, but that was fine, because he seemed to be enjoying the pleasant chatter I filled the air with. I could tell, too, by the way he moaned in appreciation whenever he took a bite of my delicious home cooking. I was even so bold as to run my hand down his back as I cut into the meat of the thigh. Both of us groaned around that mouthful of meat. Esteban even started to shed more tears, the precious lamb. It appears Intern Benjamin is tapping on the glass. Now I'm embarrassed. Here I am going on about my wonderful morning when I should have been reporting the news. Some of you must be wondering when the Desert Bluffs Zoo will be reopening after that terrible and freak snowstorm that hit us just last month. Don't worry, kids. The lions, tigers, and half of the bears are doing just fine. Strex Corp has even managed to wrangle some of those mutated koalas that got free during spring break. We here at the station are still praying for the safe return of Becca, the small third grader that got lost in the frenzied mob of college students infected by those fuzzy green marsupials that left town in a big hurry. Is Cancun really worth trampling small children, citizens? And now, fiddlesticks. Before we go on to the weather, I thought I'd share just one more small thing with you listeners still interested to hear how my day ended this morning. Once I'd had my fill, and Esteban was positively bursting as well, I managed to steal a few locks of his glossy hair on my way out the door. I've been staring at them this whole morning. They're hanging right by my microphone, and the light glinting off of the window adds a little shine. I am so thrilled Strex Corp saw it my way and let me take care of the marvelous scientist. Now Esteban will always be a part of me in some way. I can even look forward to my dinner tonight, knowing his presence and Mother's treats will be there to greet me upon my return. Something just occurred to me, though. I don't have hands like Esteban did. Would I have been unworthy of his affections had he been allowed to go on living in Desert Bluffs, blissfully unaware? Would our relationship have blossomed if Strex Corp hadn't been left wanting with Esteban's team? Would I have been considered inadequate with my soft and uncalloused hands? The end.